Coco came dashing down the hallway, arms stretched out like a spooky spirit. "Woo!" he called, pretending to haunt. As he ran, "I'm coming to get you." Kira squealed with laughter and darted into her room. She was just about to slam the door shut when thump, bump, crash. She heard a muffled "oh." Poor Coco had tripped, tumbling into a heap on the floor. A tangled bedsheet was wrapped all around him, covering his head as he struggled to break free. Kira wanted to help, but she was laughing so hard that she could barely stand straight. Watching him wrestle with the enormous white sheet was far too funny. At last, Coco managed to pull it off and rubbed his sore head, grinning sheepishly. I think I forgot to cut the eye holes in the right place," he muttered, glaring suspiciously at the wall he'd run into. "That is? What happens when you try to be a ghost and sneak up on me?" Kira giggled. "Besides, weren't you supposed to be the skeleton this year?" As usual, she was absolutely right. Coco and Kira had already decided their Halloween costumes would be a bony skeleton, and she would dress as a giant, round pumpkin. They had spent hours putting everything together. Coco stitched and stretched his suit so the bones glowed across the fabric, while Kira carefully built her enormous pumpkin costume out of cardboard, squishy foam, and way more orange paint than they thought they'd ever need. By the time they were finished, Kira's pumpkin looked like a prize-winning giant from the county fair, so big it nearly swallowed up the little panda inside. Every year, the magical Halloween train rolled through Sleepy Forest, inviting all the woodland creatures to climb aboard. The train whisked them off to the grandest pumpkin patch anyone could imagine. It was so vast that Captain Feathers, the pilot of Albatross Airways, needed a full 15 minutes just to fly across it from end to end. In that patch there were pumpkins of every size, tiny ones, no bigger than a curled-up mouse, and gigantic ones as hefty as a hip. It was the perfect place for animals to pick their Halloween pumpkins, carry them home, and carve them into glowing lanterns with candles and sparkling fairy lights inside. Once Coco finally freed himself from the troublesome sheet, he helped Kira climb into her huge pumpkin suit. Then he wriggled into his skeleton outfit, turning around so Kira could zip him up. She tried, but with most of her arms stuck inside her pumpkin costume, she wasn't much help. Still, after some twisting, shaking, and a lot of giggling, Coco was zipped and ready. Hand in paw, they set off together toward the station. Along the way, they gathered friends from Sleepy Forest until by the time they reached Sleepy Forest Central, a cheerful crowd had formed pumpkins, black cats, and friendly little witches all joining in for the magical Halloween ride. Alongside them stood a cheerful bunch of firefighters, a pack of adorable dinosaurs, and many more forest friends. Together, Cuddle the Poogle and her kangaroo pal Kevin had cleverly combined their costumes to become a bright, bouncy pink horse, complete with wobbly ears and a swishy tail. Everyone crowded together on the platform, buzzing with excitement as the moment of the train's arrival drew nearer and nearer. Then, from far off in the distance, came a long, echoing whistle. Heads craned, ears perked, and eyes widened as a faint plume of smoke curled into the sky, growing larger with every second. And then there it was. The glowing orange carriages of the Halloween Express steamed into the station, brakes squealing and smoke huffing in a final dramatic puff before it came to a stop. Out leapt the conductor, a flustered flamingo, feathers slightly ruffled, who usually worked on the famous Salty Wallop Express. But once every year, she traded her usual duties to take charge of the magical Halloween train. With a flap and a hop, she darted down the platform, flinging open doors and waving all the creatures of Sleepy Forest aboard. Getting Kira through the narrow doorway in her giant pumpkin costume took some effort. Her round shape meant she wedged tightly against the frame, but with a push from behind and a pop-lop sound, she finally squeezed through, Coco right at her side. They waddled down the aisle and found a pair of seats together. Inside, the carriages sparkled with enchantment. Silver and gold cobwebs dangled from the ceilings, while carved pumpkins with glowing grins sat proudly on the tables, their insides lit up by fireflies that flitted in endless circles. The flamingo conductor, cap tipped jauntily to the side, dashed from carriage to carriage, reading out names from a clipboard and making sure no passenger was left behind. When satisfied, she leaped back outside, sprinted along the platform with legs like stilts, slammed each door shut, and blew her whistle with gusto. Then, in one final bound and a puff of pink feathers, she dove back onto the train. With a lurch, a whistle, and a chug, the Halloween Express began its magical journey. As it rattled along the tracks, the flamingo hurried through the carriages, handing out treat bags to every traveler. Coco peeked inside his and found ghost-shaped marshmallows, licorice witches, and tiny pumpkin candies that cracked open to reveal a soft, gooey caramel center. There were also spiderwebs spun from sugar, sticky toffee apples, fluffy candy floss, and towering muffins baked by Betty Badger's bakery, each topped with a smiling skeleton piped from icing. The only problem, Kira's arms, trapped inside her enormous pumpkin costume, barely stretched far enough to reach her mouth. Eating was almost impossible. After a few funny attempts, they discovered the perfect solution. Coco could feed her, so there they sat, a skeleton carefully passing candies and cakes to a giant pumpkin, giggling as marshmallows, witches, and sugar webs went sailing across the table. The Halloween train clattered merrily along, filled with chatter and laughter. Outside, the giant pumpkin orange sun had sunk down into its bed, and the night sky glittered with twinkling stars. Hundreds of owls and bats had gathered in the darkness, swooping and fluttering alongside the train, as though they too were part of the magical procession. It was a night unlike any other. Once a year, gathering where creatures of the forest held enormous parties and reunited with family they hadn't seen since the last Halloween festival. Even the faraway cousins, second cousins, third cousins, and those twice removed relatives no one ever quite understood came fluttering in to join the fun. Sometimes flocks of bats simply swirled aimlessly in the night sky, darting wherever the wind carried them. Other times, though, they performed astonishing aerial tricks, shaping themselves into marvelous patterns. One moment, they looked like a witch gliding across the stars on her broom, and the next they rearranged into the outline of a gigantic pumpkin drifting through the sky, glowing from within, as thousands of fireflies illuminated its insides. Coco and Kira, excited by all the sights, wandered to the end of their carriage. They tugged open the heavy window in the door, and a rush of icy night air swept in, tickling their fur. Leaning out, They waved joyfully at the owls, swooping alongside the train. With wide eyes and outstretched wings, the owls showed off daring stunts they'd spent the whole year practicing. One even spun upside down, performing a full loop-the-loop at breathtaking speed all while keeping pace with the chugging Halloween Express. It was a spectacular show. Then, as the bats shifted again, this time taking the form of a black cat soaring on a broomstick, Kira's mind wandered to a memory from school. She had once learned a poem about a train. Scrunching her brow, she tapped her paw against her head, trying to recall the words. The train thundered past a tiny station, and suddenly bits of the poem returned. She gazed out at hedgerows, glowing faintly with the light of glowworms, and faraway hills painted as silhouettes against a sky bright with twinkling stars. Her paw began tapping on the carriage edge, keeping rhythm with the train is a steady beat as the poem trickled back into her mind. Faster than fairies, faster than witches, bridges and houses, hedges and ditches, charging along like troops in a battle, past fields of meadows, horses and cattle, over the hills and across the plain. The sights rush by like heavy rain, and ever again, in the blink of an eye, painted stations whistle by. Coco watched her fondly, smiling at the sight of his sister closing her eyes, paw drumming in time, a small frown creasing her face as she tried to piece together every line. "I like those first words," Coco said softly. "The part about faster than fairies, faster than witches." As though the bats had overheard, they suddenly broke formation and reassembled themselves into the fluttering figure of a fairy. She darted along beside the train, wings shimmering, skirts fluttering in the wind, and in her hand she held a golden wand that sparkled as fireflies swarmed around it like living stardust. Coco and Kira clapped and cheered, their eyes shining with delight. The Batstun fairy waved with grins before scattering again, soaring back to the great party in the night sky. Just then, the flustered flamingo conductor came bustling through the carriage in a flurry of pink feathers. With a sharp blast of his whistle, he reminded everyone to line up neatly when it was time to leave. Pumpkin Patch Station was only a few minutes away, he warned, and all passengers must step down in calm, orderly lines. Every creature in the carriage nodded seriously, solemnly promising to behave, though their eyes still sparkled with the thrill of excitement. Of course, when the train finally screeched into Pumpkin Patch Station brakes, squealing and steam puffing out in one last dramatic burst, there was no holding back the excitement. Every passenger glanced at the others with wide eyes, gave squeaky little cheers, and then charged for the doors all at once. The result was a jumble of animals squeezing their way onto the platform, some popping out of the tight doorways with a comical sound. Coco and Kira, S1's perfect pumpkin costumes did Tifa quite as well. They were noticeably squashed from being pressed against walls and doors. Still, they looked round enough that anyone could tell they were very clearly, almost certainly, probably pumpkins. Meanwhile, Cuddle and Kevin faced a small mishap. In the rush, the pink horse they de-created together, separated front legs, trotting in one direction while the back half wandered off the other way. For a moment there was half a horse on each side of the platform until someone kindly matched them up again. Then, with a little shake and shuffle, the bright pink horse was whole once more. The flamingo conductor, who had seen this exact sort of chaos year after year, simply sighed and chuckled. He always asked the animals to step off the train calmly and in neat, orderly lines. And every year, without fail, they promised they would, only to forget the moment excitement bubbled over. Oh, well, he didn't mind. Now that everyone was off, he finally had a moment of peace. Pulling out a lavender-scented cloth, he laid it gently across his thighs, sank back into the soft cushions of his seat, and decided to take a short rest. In an hour, he would have to gather everyone back on board for the return journey to Sleepy Forest Bud. For now, calm and quiet were his companions. Outside, the night sky was breathtaking. A huge, glowing orange moon had taken the sun's place, looking for all the world like a great pumpkin lantern hanging in the heavens. The stars were especially sharp and twinkling, like the shining tips of witches' wands scattered across the dark. The glow was so strong and so clear that the vast pumpkin fields seemed to shimmer with light, even without lanterns. The animals, once free of the cozy carriages, bundled themselves up in hats, scarves, and mittens. It didn't matter in the least that a ghost was now wearing a bright red scarf wrapped 3 times around its neck, or that a pumpkin was proudly sporting a blue woolly hat. That was part of the charm of being out on such a crisp night, your breath puffing silver in the moonlight, so long as you were warm and snug while enjoying it. Coco and Kira had already made a pact. This year, instead of each choosing a smaller pumpkin, they would join forces and carry one enormous one together. The only challenge, of course, was that the further you wandered into the pumpkin patch, the bigger and heavier the pumpkins grew. Tiny creatures like mice and squirrels were perfectly happy near the edge of the field, where pumpkins no larger than marbles and golf balls rolled aisle back toward the train. But the larger animals, rhinos, elephants, and the like strode straight toward the far side, holding firm to their motto, "Go big or go home." Giggling, Coco and Kira bounced along between the rows, their squashed pumpkin costumes bobbing up and down as they... Behind them, Cardell and Kevin were realizing a new problem. Being only half a horse each, it was nearly impossible to manage a whole pumpkin on their own. They flopped down in the middle of the field, turning toward each other to discuss what size they ought to choose. The result was a very strange sight indeed. A bright pink horse, folded up and hunched over in the pumpkin patch, having a serious discussion. Meanwhile, Coco and Kira continued their search. They passed pumpkins no bigger than a curled-up kitten, pumpkins large enough to serve as sturdy side tables, and even some round, plump ones that matched the size of Kira's fluffy white panda belly. Onward they went, deeper into the glowing field, until at last they reached the grandest pumpkins of them all. The pumpkins at this end of the field were so enormous that Coco and Kira weren't entirely certain they'd even fit through the train doors. That seemed to be the sign that they had gone far enough. Looking around, they noticed very few others had made it this deep into the patchant. Those who had were already turning back, pumpkins in tow. An elephant gave them a cheerful salute with his trunk as he lumbered past, his great head pushing against a pumpkin nearly the size of himself. A rhino came trotting along too, a massive pumpkin speared neatly on the end of his horn. The poor fellow couldn't see a thing, but his trusty oxpecker friend guided him with chirps and flutters. Leading the way back, toward the station. At the edge of the pumpkin field stood a wise old owl, spectacles perched carefully on his beak. With a neat clipboard tucked under his wing, he checked names off one by one. The rule was firm. Every visitor was allowed only one pumpkin or more, no less. A pumpkin the size of a thimble counted just the same as one that could be carved into a grand carriage. After all, the pumpkin patch wasn't just for the animals of Sleepy Forest. Many others from faraway places would come tonight too, and the owl had to ensure there were plenty to go around. At last, Coco and Kira chose their prize pumpkin. It was enormous, perfectly round, and much too heavy to carry. They tried lifting it, but quickly discovered there was only one option: roll it. With a sigh and a grin, they leaned their shoulders against its sides and began the slow, steady push. First went the hats, tossed aside when the heat of the effort grew too much. Then the scarves and gloves were stripped away, until the two of them were down to nothing but their skeleton and pumpkin costumes, puffing and panting in the moonlit field. Each roll seemed harder than the last, for the pumpkin kept collecting clumps of mud as it trundled along, growing heavier with every turn. Babam push breathe, brace. Babam push again, and so it went step after step, their rhythm becoming the music of their struggle. Coco leaned in with all his might, sometimes sneaking a peek around the side to see if the exit looked any closer. It readily did. Determined, he tried counting his steps to keep himself going. 1, he whispered, forcing his paws into the dirt. 2, he said, shoulder pressed firm against the pumpkin's side. 3, he muttered, waiting for the familiar ba-bum sound of the roll. 4, breathing deep and slow, steadying himself. 5, pushing harder so Kira could push a little less. 6, glancing up to see the owl soaring overhead, keeping watch. 7, legs straining under the weights. 8, bracing for another roll. 9, eyes squeezed shut in, concentration. 10, shoving with every ounce of strength he had. When he looked up again, his heart leapt. The pumpkin had definitely moved forward, inch by inch, bringing them closer to the end of the patch. Faster than fairies, faster than witches, he muttered, recalling the poem Kira had recited earlier. Then, with a crooked smile, he added, though really, it should be slower than sloths and slower than snails, creeping along like a ship with no sails. By now, they were only a few meters from the exit, the station lights twinkling in the distance. Most of the other animals were already back on board with their pumpkins, even Koodle and Kevin, who had finally decided on 2 medium-sized gourds and carried them back over 2 trips. And Hust, the flamingo conductor, lifted the lavender cloth from his eyes, stretched his long legs, and stepped out from his guard's van. With a sharp blow of his whistle, the flamingo guard signaled that just a few minutes remained before the Halloween train would depart. Coco and Kira exchanged a wide-eyed look, panic flickering between them, then pressed their shoulders firmly back against the stubborn pumpkin. Together, they heaved it forward again, refusing to give up. From the train carriages came a chorus of cheers and claps, the other passengers leaning out of windows to encourage them. "Come on, Coco, you've got this," called Fritz, bouncing excitedly up and down. "Keep pushing, Kira. Don't stop," shouted Prickles, his voice muffled by a mouthful of gooey ghost marshmallows. As they trundled past the owl at the gate, He gave a satisfied nod, ran his beak down the paper list, and neatly ticked off their names. The siblings gave one last shove, inching their colossal pumpkin onto the station platform. Steam hissed, swirling in white clouds as the train began to wake with a great metallic groan. Above, the night sky had filled with owls and bats, wings fluttering as they circled the station, cheering for Coco and Kira in a joyful cacophony. But it was Mumbles the elephant who made the greatest difference, clambering down from the carriage. He wrapped his mighty trunk around the pumpkin, giving it the final squeeze needed to fit through the doors. With a gentle sweep, he lifted Coco and Kira up as well, placing them safely inside just as the train let out another whistle and began to rumble forward. The flamingo raised his whistle again, but the poor fellow was so weary that the note came out faint and thin, drowned almost entirely by the thunder of applause for the brother and sister who had managed to board with the largest pumpkin of all. Excited chatter filled the carriage for a time, swapping stories about how tricky it had been to pick the right pumpkin, how heavy they were, and what marvelous designs they planned to carve. But soon, the flamingo conductor bustled through, flapping his wings and calling up everyone. On your feet. The animal scrambled into the aisle as he clattered about, folding seats here, moving tables there. In the blink of an eye, the whole carriage was transformed. Neat rows of cozy bunk beds lined the walls, each tucked with a plump pillow, a rolled blanket, and little curtains that could be drawn for privacy. It looked like a traveling nest of dreams, ready to carry its passengers back to Sleepy Forest in comfort. Coco was so utterly worn out from the pumpkin-pushing ordeal that he could barely climb the ladder to his bed. Step by step, he dragged himself upward. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then finally flopped onto the mattress in a heap. With a sleepy sigh, he unrolled the blanket, pulled it snug up to his chin, and curled himself into a tight, warm ball. The pillow cradled his head so softly, and the curtains around his nook blocked out the world. As the train began its gentle, rhythmic clatter down the tracks, Coco was asleep almost instantly. Through the night, the train sped on, faster than fairies, swifter than witches, across bridges, past hedges, fields, and ditches, and in his dreams, Coco found himself soaring on the back of a mighty owl. Its broad wings stretched wide against the starlit sky. Wrapped in soft feathers, he felt weightless, safe, and warm as they climbed higher and higher until the enormous pumpkins below shrank to mere specks, no bigger than grains of sand. Up they rose, above the tallest treetops of Sleepy Forest, above the glistening ribbon of the silver river that curled and twisted through the valley, higher still, until Coco reached out a paw and brushed the very stars. In this enchanted dream zoo, you'll discover animals unlike any you've ever seen while awake. Creatures that the waking world insists cannot possibly exist yet here in your dreamscape. They live and breathe. And do you know the reason why? It is because your mind holds incredible power, a treasure chest of wonder and magic. Within dreams, your imagination is limitless. It can spin entire worlds from nothing but a thought, painting landscapes and creatures out of thin air. Here, anything your heart longs for can take shape. So let your eyelids grow heavier. Let your body sink deeper into the softness of your covers. Let yourself drift fully into rest. As your body slips into stillness, your mind floats free sailing away into the vast world of dreams. The dream spirits are already waiting for you there, ready to take your hand. This is their home, a place overflowing with marvels and delights. Notice their gentle smiles, bright and kind. Feel the comforting warmth of their hands in yours. They hold your hand with care, giving it a tender squeeze, guiding you step by step into the land of sleep. Together, you'll wander into adventures spun from magic. Perhaps you walk beneath thick emerald jungles, where extraordinary creatures peek from behind glowing leaves to share their stories with you. Perhaps you enter castles built entirely from shimmering clouds, or glide along rainbow-colored rivers, sparkling as they carry you downstream. Maybe you sit beside a glowing campfire by a lake, where the raindrops fall so softly that they sound like music, a gentle lullaby written just for you. And in these adventures, remember to thank your dream spirits. Whisper softly, "Thank you, dream spirits." And when you do, they smile and whisper back, "Thank you." Because the dream spirits feel just as lucky to walk beside you as you are to have them guiding you through your magical dream world. Now let your eyes fall completely closed. Allow the lids to grow heavy, warm, and still. From the very top of your head all the way down to your fingertips and the very tips of your toes, let your body become warm, heavy, and deeply relaxed. Let your mind slip fully into the gentle world of sleep, a world where every possibility exists, where every dream can come alive. Good night.